can control all of us.
That's why I'm here. To fight.
All of us can control our powers.
Then don't. This is war.
Everything they built, and from the ash in their world, we'll build a better one.
X-Men Apocalypse, Analyses and Explanations. The film serves as a thematic and narrative bridge, concluding the first-class trilogy while forcibly birthing a new status quo for the franchise. Its central conflict is less about physical survival and more about ideological succession. Which philosophy will define the next era of mutant kind? Will it be Apocalypse's social Darwinism, Magneto's traumatized nihilism, or Professor X's resilient optimism? The film serves as a thematic and narrative bridge, concluding the first-class trilogy while forcibly birthing a new status quo for the franchise. Its central conflict is less about physical survival and more about ideological succession. Which philosophy will define the next era of mutant kind? Will it be Apocalypse's social Darwinism, Magneto's traumatized nihilism, or Professor X's resilient optimism? The year 1983 setting is crucial, existing in the new timeline created in Days of Future Past. This allows the film to rewrite classic X-Men lore free of prior continuity, but it also creates a tonal dissonance. The world feels both historically grounded and mythologically unmoored, a clash that mirrors Apocalypse's own disruption of modernity. And Saban's introduction in ancient Egypt is thematically potent. He is not merely a mutant, but a primordial force, a god-king who views civilization's progress as decay. His belief that the world has grown weak under false gods frames his mission not as conquest, but as a corrective purification, a dark mirror to Charles Xavier's dream of peaceful evolution. Apocalypse's methodology is core to his character. He doesn't just recruit horsemen. He enhances them, unlocking their full potential but in a way that corrupts their nature. This perverts the very concept of mentorship that Xavier embodies, positioning Apocalypse as a dark father figure who empowers through domination, not nurture. Magneto's arc is the film's tortured soul. After a decade in hiding, having built a peaceful human life, his tragedy is Shakespearean. The murder of his wife and daughter by human fear and clumsiness validates his lifelong pessimism, making his alliance with Apocalypse a logical, if extreme, outcome of his grief. He no longer wants equality or dominance, but annihilation. Eric's destruction of Auschwitz is a powerful, if on-the-nose, symbol. By tearing down the monument to his own victimization, he seeks to erase the part of himself defined by human cruelty. In doing so, however, he becomes an agent of the very mass destruction he once suffered, completing a tragic cycle of trauma begetting violence. Professor X's journey is one of compromised idealism. The opening scene in 1983 shows a thriving school, but his contentment has made him somewhat complacent. His captivity inside his own mind, forced to watch Apocalypse's global assault, is a visceral metaphor for the vulnerability of his philosophy when confronted with pure, unadulterated power. The psychic battle between Xavier and Apocalypse inside the astral plane is a key ideological showdown. Apocalypse dismisses Xavier's hope as a weakness, championing strength above all. This conflict crystallizes the film's central question. In a world of superpowers, is compassion a strength or a fatal flaw? Mystique's role as a reluctant hero and mutant icon feels narratively forced, a clear extension of Jennifer Lawrence's star power post-days of Future Past. While it attempts to explore the burden of being a symbol, it often clashes with her character's historically ambivalent and self-serving nature, diluting her edge. The young X-Men are introduced as raw, fearful powers. Jean Grey is plagued by prophetic nightmares and the fear of her own Phoenix potential. Cyclops struggles with a power he cannot control without external aid. They are not heroes yet, which makes their rise to the occasion the film's most genuine arc. Storm's recruitment as a horseman is one of the film's more successful character threads for the new generation. As an orphan street thief in Cairo, she is literally worshipping Apocalypse as a god before he enhances her. Her turn against him is motivated not by morality initially, but by the betrayal of her god failing to protect the innocent. Psylocke and Archangel, while visually striking, suffer from severe underdevelopment. They serve primarily as embodiments of Apocalypse's strength ideology. Psylocke embraces power for its own sake. Archangel seeks violent release from his controlled life, but are given no substantive backstory or motivation beyond aesthetic function. The Quicksilver sequence, set to Sweet Dreams, Are Made of This, is a masterclass in combining character, humor, and spectacular visual effects. It serves a vital narrative purpose, demonstrating that the school is a family worth saving and providing a moment of joy before the devastating third act. However, its comedic tone clashes with the surrounding gravity. The Weapon X cameo is a brutal, impactful detour. It connects Logan to the new timeline, shows the horrific origin of his adamantium, and allows Jean Grey a moment of telepathic empathy that foreshadows their profound future connection. It's a fan-service moment that successfully advances character and theme. Apocalypse's plan to transfer his consciousness into Xavier's body is a brilliant strategic move. It targets the X-Men's moral and tactical center, seeking to corrupt the very ideal of mutant sanctuary. It also represents a desire for the ultimate psychic tool to enact his global transformation, moving beyond physical destruction to mental domination. The final battle's location in Cairo is symbolically significant. It's a return to the origin of civilization, where Apocalypse first ruled. The destruction of modern Cairo represents the wiping clean of history he desires, making the X-Men stand a defense of both the present and the progressive future Xavier believes in. Jean Grey's unleashing of the Phoenix Force to disintegrate Apocalypse is the climax's deus ex machina, but it is carefully foreshadowed. Her arc is about overcoming fear of her power. In destroying a god, she accepts her own divine-level potential, tragically setting the stage for Dark Phoenix. Magneto's redemption is earned through pain. He is not convinced by rhetoric, but by witnessing the courage of the young X-Men, particularly the self-sacrifice of Mystique, his oldest friend, and remembering the love of his daughter. His final act, lifting the rubble to rebuild Xavier's school, is a silent recommitment to hope. The film's visual palette, particularly for Apocalypse and his horsemen, draws directly from 1980s comic book aesthetics, big, bright, and muscular. This contrasts with the more subdued tones of earlier films in the trilogy, signaling a shift towards a more comic booky, less politically nuanced era for the franchise. Oscar Isaac's performance as Apocalypse, though criticized, is a study in deliberate, inhuman cadence. His voice, slowed and multi-layered, conveys ancient wisdom and immense boredom with the modern world. The weakness lies not in his portrayal, but in a script that offers the character little nuance beyond megalomaniacal pronouncements. The theme of false gods permeates the film. Apocalypse sees himself as the true God displacing false ones, technology nation-states. Charles Xavier, in his way, is also a false god to his students, a benevolent one, but whose teachings Apocalypse views as a comforting lie that prevents mutants from embracing their true strength. The film functions as a soft reboot by literally destroying the old Xavier mansion and having Charles, now bald and in a more classic wheelchair, rebuild it with a new, younger team in more comic-accurate uniforms. This meta-narrative of destruction and renewal mirrors the filmmakers' intent to refresh the franchise lineup. The subplot of Moira MacTaggart re-entering Charles's life reconnects to First Class and provides a human perspective. Her CIA role also introduces the incident at the nuclear missile base, which directly triggers Magneto's tragedy, tying the personal and global plots together through human fear of mutant power. Nightcrawler's search for belonging is a poignant thread. A devout Christian who is also a demonic-looking mutant, he finds his place not in a church, but in Xavier's school, a spiritual sanctuary that accepts his whole self. His faith is redirected from a distant god to the tangible family of mutant kind. The film's pacing is often cited as a flaw, with a first act that juggles too many global introductions and a final act that devolves into repetitive CGI destruction. This structural imbalance reflects the challenge of serving as both a trilogy finale and a launchpad for a new generation. The critical consensus of a middling chapter stems from this identity crisis. It lacks the tight political allegory of First Class or the clever time travel stakes of Days of Future Past. Instead, it embraces a broader, more comic book apocalyptic scale that can feel generic and overstuffed. From a production standpoint, the sheer scale of the sets and visual effects, particularly for the crumbling cities, aimed for a disaster movie feel. However, the CGI was inconsistently received, with some sequences, like the final battle, criticized for looking artificial and weightless, undermining the intended epic grandeur. The post-credits scene is one of the franchise's most tantalizing. The Essex Corporation collecting Weapon X blood samples directly teases the arrival of Mr. Sinister, a brilliant and manipulative geneticist who would have been a perfect, more intellectual foil for the newly reformed X-Men. Its abandonment in later films represents a missed opportunity. In the broader franchise legacy, the film is the necessary, messy pivot point. It reset the board to a more familiar comic book status quo, but at the cost of narrative coherence and thematic depth. Its primary success lies in establishing a young, charismatic core team that audiences wanted to see more of, even if their introduction was chaotic. Ultimately, the film is about the passing of the torch through trial by fire. The old guard, Xavier, Magneto, Mystique, are tested to their limits, and the new guard must rise before they are ready. The school rebuilt at the end is not just a building, but a symbol of the dream evolving, scarred but persistent, for a new generation. His journey from a humble, almost saint-like figure to a warrior recognizing the necessity for defense showcases an evolution in his philosophy. This adaptation becomes essential in facing an enemy who respects no rules of engagement or sanctity of the mind, forcing Xavier to confront the darker realities of his peaceful world. His final psychic stand, though overwhelmed, proves his resilience and becomes the crucial anchor that allows Jean Grey to find him, symbolizing how his hope ultimately enables his rescue. Magneto's tragic narrative serves as the film's devastating emotional core, a profound exploration of how absolute loss can validate a lifetime of bitterness. His peaceful life in Poland, a tender secret he built from the ashes of his past, is obliterated in a moment of panicked human violence, erasing his hard-won faith. This catastrophe doesn't merely anger him. It fundamentally proves his oldest, darkest belief that coexistence is a fantasy, making his alliance with Apocalypse not a mere partnership, but a suicidal embrace of global nihilism. The film's portrayal of Apocalypse himself is a study in ancient, uncompromising ideology clashing with a modern world he finds utterly decadent. His disdain is not just for humanity, but for mutants who have, in his view, willingly diminished themselves by living in the shadows of their supposed inferiors. His goal of transferring his essence into Charles Xavier represents the ultimate perversion, seeking to corrupt the very font of mutant empathy and idealism into a tool for global psychic subjugation. Mystique's positioning as a public hero and leader creates a fascinating, if uneven, tension within the narrative framework of the film. Her instinctual role has always been that of an outsider and a survivor, making her an awkward fit for the mantle of a symbol that Charles once carried. This conflict between her nature and her perceived duty adds a layer of reluctant responsibility, as she guides the young mutants not with lofty ideals, but with pragmatic lessons on survival and self-acceptance. The introduction of the young X-Men team is handled with an emphasis on their foundational fears and burgeoning powers, establishing them as individuals before they become a cohesive unit. Jean Grey's terrifying psychic premonitions and lack of control, Cyclops' destructive optical blasts that require a crutch to manage, and Nightcrawler's search for a spiritual home are all classic elements rerouted in this new timeline. Their collective arc is about learning that their perceived flaws are, in fact, their greatest strengths when harnessed together. Storm's path from worshipper to warrior is a subtle but significant arc of disillusionment and self-determination. Living as a street urchin in Cairo, she sees in Apocalypse a literal deity who promises strength and purpose, a compelling offer for a powerless orphan. Her turn is catalyzed not by a sudden moral awakening, but by witnessing the collateral damage of his power. Her god is indifferent to innocent life, breaking the covenant of protection she believed in and forcing her to choose her own moral path. The visual and thematic design of Apocalypse's horsemen underscores his corrupting influence, enhancing their abilities while stripping away their individuality and moral compass. Psylocke's psychic blade and Archangel's metallic wings are extensions of a will to power, turning them into sleek, deadly instruments. Their enhancements are a dark gift, granting them their fullest potential, but at the cost of their autonomy, making them stark contrasts to the X-Men, who are taught to control and integrate their powers with their humanity. The now iconic Quicksilver sequence is a brilliant narrative device that serves multiple purposes beyond breathtaking visual spectacle. It is a testament to the found family within the Xavier mansion, showcasing students and teachers in moments of mundane joy seconds before disaster. Furthermore, it solidifies Quicksilver's character as not just a speedster, but as a deeply compassionate young man who uses his incredible gift for meticulous, heartfelt rescue, reinforcing the theme that power is defined by its application. Wolverine's ferocious cameo as the feral Weapon X is a masterful piece of franchise connective tissue and thematic brutality. It serves as a visceral origin story for his adamantium skeleton within this revised timeline, while also providing a stark contrast between uncontrolled animalistic rage and disciplined heroism. Jean's telepathic calming of his torment is a pivotal moment, foreshadowing their profound future connection and demonstrating the power of empathy to reach even the most lost and tortured souls. The film's climax in Cairo is a symphony of chaotic destruction where the personal and ideological battles converge on a global stage. The crumbling pyramids and modern cityscapes being torn asunder represent the literal and figurative collision of ancient dogma with contemporary civilization. It is here that the younger X-Men, operating without Professor X's direct guidance, must implement the lessons they've learned, coordinating their unique abilities in a desperate bid to save their mentor and the world. Jean Grey's confrontation with Apocalypse is the cathartic release of an entire film's worth of foreshadowed anxiety and latent power. Tapping into the Phoenix Force is not presented as a clean victory, but as a terrifying, overwhelming surge of energy that threatens to consume her even as it saves the day. This moment perfectly sets the tragic stage for her future, establishing that this immense power is an integral, volatile part of her identity, not an external force to be wielded safely. Magneto's redemption is neither swift nor easy, earned through the painful witness of sacrifice and the stirring of buried humanity. Seeing Mystique nearly die to save him acts as a shock to his system, a reminder of a bond older than his grief. His subsequent decision to help rebuild the X-Mansion is powerfully wordless. It is an act of atonement expressed not through speech, but through the symbolic reconstruction of the home for hope he once sought to destroy. The production design deliberately shifts from the period piece sleekness of the prior films towards a more audacious, comic book-inspired aesthetic, particularly in the third act. The colorful, individualized uniforms of the new X-Men team signal a departure into a more confident, public superhero identity. This visual rebirth parallels the narrative fresh start, embracing a brighter, if less nuanced, palette that harkens back to the classic comic book panels of the 1980s setting. Oscar Isaac's performance, buried under layers of prosthetics, aims for a disquieting, otherworldly presence through measured speech and an aura of weary supremacy. His Apocalypse speaks not with rage, but with the disappointed calm of a creator surveying a failed project, making his genocidal plans feel like a logical, almost clinical necessity. The criticism of the character lies less in Isaac's portrayal and more in a script that provides immense scale but minimal psychological complexity for its central villain. The recurring motif of false gods is expertly woven into the fabric of multiple character journeys. For Storm, it is a literal belief shattered. For Magneto, Apocalypse briefly becomes a new god to follow after his old idols of family and peace have been murdered. For Xavier's students, their professor is a benevolent guide whose teachings are violently challenged, forcing them to question whether his pacifism is a principle or a limitation in a world now facing an ancient, merciless deity. The literal destruction and subsequent rebuilding of the Xavier School is the film's most potent metaphor for its own purpose within the franchise. The shattered remains of the old mansion, a location rich with history from earlier films, are cleared to make way for a new, modernized version. This physical transformation mirrors the passing of the torch from the first-class generation to the classic team, acknowledging the past while consciously constructing a future from its foundations. Moira MacTaggart's return injects a crucial human perspective and a tangible link to the shared history of Charles and Eric. Her role as a CIA operative grounds the escalating mutant crisis in a geopolitical context, showing how governments perceive these events as existential threats. Her relationship with Charles rekindles a thread of personal longing and normalcy that he has sacrificed, adding a layer of poignant regret to his otherwise resolute leadership. Nightcrawler's arc is a beautiful exploration of faith in a world that would judge him by his appearance. His initial scene, praying in a church he cannot enter without causing panic, encapsulates his lonely search for grace. Finding a home at Xavier's school offers him a different kind of communion, one based on mutual acceptance and purpose. His faith is not abandoned but redirected towards the tangible miracle of belonging and the familial bond of the X-Men. The film's structural challenges are evident in its attempt to balance intimate character moments with spectacle of an unprecedented scale. The need to service Apocalypse's global awakening, Magneto's personal tragedy, the introduction of new mutants, and the culmination of the trilogy's arcs often leads to a fragmented narrative flow. Certain elements, like the Horseman's recruitment, feel rushed, while others, like the final battle, are extended to the point of visual fatigue for some viewers. Critical reception often focused on this imbalance, noting that the profound character drama that defined the best of the first-class trilogy was at times drowned out by generic city-leveling visuals. The philosophical conflict between Xavier and Apocalypse, which could have been intensely personal, is often lost amidst the rubble, reducing their duel to a contest of raw power rather than a clash of diametrically opposed worldviews. From a technical standpoint, the ambition to create a mutant-centric disaster film pushed the boundaries of the franchise's visual effects. Sequences like the rearrangement of Earth's magnetic field or the disintegration of ancient structures were massive undertakings. The success of these effects was mixed. While Quicksilver's scenes were universally praised for their innovation, the CGI-heavy final confrontation was criticized by some for lacking the tactile weight and tension of the franchise's more grounded fights. The post-credits scene, featuring the enigmatic Essex Corporation, was a promise of a sophisticated future villain that regrettably went unfulfilled. Mr. Sinister, a manipulative geneticist obsessed with mutant evolution, would have been a perfect intellectual and sinister foil to the newly formed, idealistic X-Men team. This tease highlighted a potential direction toward more nuanced stories, making its abandonment in the subsequent film all the more disappointing for dedicated fans. Within the broader X-Men cinematic legacy, this chapter is viewed as a transitional work of necessary but clumsy reconstruction. It successfully reset the board to a familiar and beloved status quo. The school, the yellow and black uniforms, the classic team dynamic, but the process of achieving that reset was narratively chaotic. It stands as a film whose value is perhaps more functional than artistic, closing one era while roughly launching another. The thematic through-line of legacy is ultimately what gives the film its emotional resonance despite its flaws. Every major character is grappling with what they will leave behind. Apocalypse with his tyrannical new world, Magneto with his cycle of vengeance, Xavier with his dream, and Mystique with her unexpected role as an icon. The young mutants represent that legacy in action, inheriting a world scarred by these conflicts and choosing to build upon the foundation of hope rather than despair. Charles Xavier's final appearance, bald and in his classic wheelchair, facing his new students in the danger room, is a perfect bookend. It visually and symbolically completes his transformation into the iconic figure from the comics and original films, signaling that the timeline has now aligned with a more traditional X-Men mythology. This moment is less about the end of a story and more about a beginning, a welcome to a new chapter of adventures for these characters. The relationship between power and responsibility is tested in extremes throughout the narrative. Apocalypse represents the absolute, irresponsible wielding of power for the purpose of domination, seeing strength as its own justification. In stark contrast, the X-Men, especially the younger ones, learn that their abilities come with the heavy burden of choice, to protect, to unite, and to exercise restraint even when facing annihilation, embodying a more heroic and humane philosophy. The film's setting in the 1980s allows for a subtle commentary on the era's excesses and fears, from Cold War tensions to the dawn of a new, flashier pop culture. Apocalypse's disdain for the modern world can be read as a reaction to this perceived superficiality, while the X-Men's vibrant new costumes embrace the boldness of the decade. This historical context provides a rich backdrop against which the timeless battle between primal power and progressive idealism plays out. Character motivations, when examined closely, often stem from a profound sense of loss or a search for belonging. Magneto is driven by the loss of his family, Storm by the loss of her guiding deity, Jean by the fear of losing control, and Nightcrawler by the absence of a home. Apocalypse himself is motivated by the loss of his ancient kingdom and his perceived rightful place as a ruler. The Xavier School ultimately becomes the answer to this universal yearning, a sanctuary built from shared experience. The strategic use of powers in the final battle highlights the film's understanding of teamwork over individual might. Cyclops' optics provide covering fire, Nightcrawler enables precision teleportation strikes, Storm redirects the environment, and Quicksilver creates opportunities through speed. This coordination showcases their growth from frightened students into a tactical unit, proving that their collective strength, guided by a shared purpose, can overcome a monolithic, singular power. Costume design plays a crucial role in character evolution and thematic signaling. Mystique's shift from her default blue form to more human clothing, and finally to a practical battlesuit, mirrors her journey towards embracing a leadership role. The Horsemen's armored, intimidating looks reflect their submission to Apocalypse's aesthetic of power, while the X-Men's final uniforms, though colorful, are functional and unified, symbolizing their equal partnership in a common cause. The sound design and score contribute significantly to the film's tonal shifts. The haunting, choral themes associated with Apocalypse evoke a sense of ancient dread and divine judgment. In contrast, the more heroic and optimistic motifs for the X-Men, particularly during the school sequences and the finale, reinforce the core thematic battle between despair and hope. The diegetic use of 80s music, like eurythmics in the Quicksilver scene, adds period flavor and rhythmic punctuation to the action. The concept of family, both biological and chosen, is a central pillar underpinning the emotional stakes. Magneto's story is entirely about the destruction and potential refounding of family. The Xavier School operates as a functional, supportive family for outcasts. Even Apocalypse perverts this concept, positioning himself as a patriarch to his four horsemen. The film argues that the strength derived from a chosen, supportive family is ultimately more resilient than the obedience demanded by a tyrannical father figure. Cinematography choices often reflect character psychology. The scenes in Poland with Magneto are shot with a cold, desaturated palette, mirroring his emotional isolation and the harshness of his loss. The interiors of the Xavier School are warm and inviting, full of natural light and open spaces, visually representing safety and community. Apocalypse's lair and the scenes of global destruction are dominated by stark shadows, deep blues, and chaotic, sweeping shots, embodying his cold and disordered vision. The editing pace deliberately accelerates as the film progresses, mimicking the escalating crisis. The leisurely introductions of characters and settings in the first act give way to rapid cross-cutting between global disaster points and personal struggles in the third act. This technique effectively conveys the overwhelming, simultaneous nature of the threat, immersing the audience in the chaos and the desperate need for the scattered heroes to converge and respond. Dialogue often serves to crystallize the film's central philosophical debate. Lines like Apocalypse's "all is revealed" speak to his God complex and certainty, while Xavier's "just because someone stumbles and loses their path doesn't mean they're lost forever" directly addresses Magneto's arc and the core theme of redemption. The young X-Men's exchanges are less philosophical and more practical, focusing on trust, fear, and coordination, grounding the epic stakes in relatable emotions. The film's treatment of its female characters is a mixed bag, offering agency to some while underdeveloping others. Mystique is thrust into a leadership position, however reluctantly. Jean Grey's journey is central to the climax, making her the ultimate savior. Storm is given a clear, self-motivated arc. However, Psylocke is relegated to a silent, lethal ornament, her formidable potential from the comics largely untapped, representing a missed opportunity for deeper engagement. The political subtext, a staple of the X-Men franchise, is less pronounced but still present. The human authorities' panic and aggression towards mutants, culminating in the tragic strike against Magneto's family, continues the theme of systemic fear and prejudice. Apocalypse's proposed solution is not integration or segregation, but absolute replacement, representing the ultimate failure of diplomacy and the terrifying allure of fascistic simplicity in the face of complex societal fear. The concept of mutation as evolution is pushed to its literal extreme by Apocalypse. He sees himself not as a random genetic outcome, but as the deliberate, rightful next step in the planet's development, a forced evolution. This stands in contrast to Xavier's view of mutation as a natural, diverse progression to be nurtured. The conflict thus becomes a battle over the very direction of evolution, one violent and imposed, the other cooperative and emergent. The film's humor, primarily channeled through Quicksilver and some of the younger mutants' interactions, provides necessary levity, but also serves a character purpose. It humanizes the heroes, reminding the audience that despite their powers, they are still teenagers and young adults navigating a terrifying situation. This balance of wit and gravity helps to prevent the apocalyptic tone from becoming monotonously grim and keeps the audience emotionally engaged with the protagonists. The legacy of past films is felt not just in returning characters, but in visual and narrative callbacks. The use of the Weapon X facility directly references X2, X-Men United. The dynamic between Charles, Eric, and Raven continues threads from First Class and Days of Future Past. This continuity provides depth for longtime fans, rewarding their investment in the character relationships even as the plot ventures into new, more fantastical territory beyond political thrillers. The ultimate victory is framed as a collective triumph of different kinds of strength. Jean's raw power, Charles's mental fortitude, Eric's mastery over magnetism, the young team's bravery, and Mystique's perseverance. No single hero could have defeated Apocalypse alone. This reinforces the core X-Men ethos that diversity and unity are strengths in themselves, and that protecting a world that fears you is the ultimate testament to a heroism defined by empathy, not dominance. In its final moments, the film firmly plants the flag for the future. The new X-Men, united and in uniform, training in the danger room under Charles's guidance, is a direct promise of classic adventures to come. It is an image of stability and purpose rebuilt from catastrophe, suggesting that while the path may be difficult and the threats immense, the dream itself is enduring, adaptable, and always ready to welcome the next generation of extraordinary individuals. His evolution from a compassionate mentor to a besieged general reveals the inherent vulnerabilities within his pacifist ideology when confronted with absolute power. This internal struggle manifests physically as he is psychically bound and forced to witness global destruction from within his own mind, a prison of his own making built on the principle of never violating another's consciousness. His ultimate resilience in this psychic battleground, refusing to yield his sense of self despite overwhelming pressure, provides the crucial tether that allows Jean Grey to locate and liberate him, symbolizing the enduring power of an unbroken will. The tragic architecture of Magneto's narrative is constructed upon the fragile peace he meticulously built from the ashes of his traumatic past, a peace obliterated in a single, cruel moment of human fear. This loss does not merely rekindle his anger. It provides catastrophic validation for his deepest philosophical convictions, transforming his grief into a suicidal nihilism where the entire world must burn as a pyre for his family. His recruitment by Apocalypse is therefore not a seduction but a surrender, an embrace of a force that mirrors his own desire for undiscriminating annihilation, making him the most potent and emotionally resonant of the Horsemen. Apocalypse stands as an ideological singularity, a being whose millennia of slumber have crystallized his contempt for a world he perceives as spiritually and physically deluded. His critique extends beyond humanity to encompass mutants who hide their brilliance, viewing Xavier's school as a clinic for the domestication of divine potential. The strategic brilliance of his plan lies in its symbolic violence. By seeking to transplant his consciousness into Xavier's body, he aims to desecrate the very temple of mutant empathy and repurpose it as the engine for global psychic enslavement, a perversion of mentorship itself. Mystique's coerced ascension to the role of mutant icon creates a compelling dissonance that the film explores with varying success, positioning a natural pragmatist and survivor as the reluctant standard-bearer for a cause. Her leadership style emerges not from Charles's philosophical doctrines, but from lived experience, teaching the young X-Men the gritty realities of survival and the strategic value of their uniqueness in a hostile world. This pragmatic guidance becomes their essential training, bridging the gap between Xavier's idealized dream and the brutal conflict they must navigate. The foundational fears of the young X-Men are meticulously established to ground their eventual heroism in relatable psychological terrain, with each character's power serving as a metaphor for adolescent anxiety. Jean Grey's telepathic and telekinetic abilities are paralleled with the terror of an unquiet mind and the fear of one's own latent potential, while Cyclops' uncontrollable optic blasts represent the destructive power of unfocused rage and the need for external control. Nightcrawler's search for sanctuary speaks to the universal desire for acceptance, transforming the Xavier Mansion from a school into a spiritual refuge for the ostracized. Storm's journey from devout acolyte to disillusioned rebel forms a subtle but complete arc that recontextualizes her comic book origins within the film's thematic framework. Her initial worship of Apocalypse is born from a desperate need for purpose and power in a life defined by poverty and invisibility. Her pivotal turn occurs when she witnesses the indiscriminate carnage of his power, realizing that a true God would protect the weak, not sacrifice them as collateral. This moment of ethical clarity forces her to claim her agency and redefine strength as protection, not mere dominance. The corruption inherent in Apocalypse's enhancement of his horsemen is visually and narratively articulated through a loss of individuality and a gain in monolithic purpose. Psylocke's lethal psychic blade and Archangel's projectile feathers are not just weapons, but extensions of Apocalypse's will, rendering their bearers sleek, silent instruments of his design. This stands in stark contrast to the X-Men, whose powers, however dangerous, are expressions of their individual identities, honed through discipline and ethical choice rather than subsumed by a greater will. Quicksilver's spectacular intervention at the school transcends its function as a visual set piece to become a profound statement on character and the sanctity of their found family. His actions are a meticulous, loving catalog of the lives within the mansion, saving each person with a personalized touch that underscores his deep connection to them. The sequence's playful tone, juxtaposed against the imminent cataclysm, reinforces the very essence of what they are fighting to preserve, a place of joy, individuality, and safety in a world hurtling toward conformity and destruction. The visceral brutality of the Weapon X sequence serves as a necessary tonal anchor and a crucial piece of historical stitching within the revised timeline. It provides the definitive, horrifying origin for Wolverine's adamantium skeleton in this new reality, grounding the character's mythos in tangible suffering. Jean Grey's compassionate psychic intervention in this maelstrom of rage is a beacon of light in pure darkness, establishing a profound, almost spiritual link between them and demonstrating that empathy is the most potent weapon against engineered brutality. Cairo's transformation into a cosmic battlefield represents the climactic convergence of the film's central ideological war, where ancient symbols are violently reshaped by conflicting visions of the future. The disintegration of millennia-old structures under Apocalypse's power signifies his desire to erase history and start anew, while the X-Men's defense of the city's people embodies a commitment to preserving and improving the existing world. This clash occurs not in a vacuum, but amidst the terrified populace, making the stakes intensely human and immediate. Jean Grey's apocalyptic unleashing of the Phoenix Force is framed not as a heroic moment of mastery, but as a terrifying surrender to a power that has always simmered beneath her fear. The visual representation of the Phoenix as a fiery, consuming wave of energy emphasizes its dual nature as both savior and destroyer. This crucial ambiguity sets the tragic foundation for her future, establishing that this victory is a pact with a force that promises ultimate power at the potential cost of her very identity and sanity. Magneto's path to redemption is arduously earned through the painful recalibration of his perspective, triggered by witnessing sacrificial courage and confronting the ghost of his own lost love. Mystique's near-fatal intervention acts as a visceral shock, breaking through his catatonic grief to remind him of a loyalty older than his rage. His subsequent, silent labor in reconstructing the X-Mansion is his most eloquent speech. It is an act of tangible atonement, using the power that raised cities to rebuild the foremost symbol of the hope he once sought to extinguish. The deliberate aesthetic shift in production design from the cool, period-specific elegance of the earlier films to a vibrant, Kirby-esque grandeur signals the franchise's confident embrace of its comic book roots. The new team's uniforms, with their distinct colors and functional design, visually declare their transition from hidden students to public superheroes, a team forged in crisis. This visual rebirth is a meta-commentary on the film's purpose, boldly stepping into a brighter, more exaggerated palette that mirrors the operatic scale of the threat they face. Oscar Isaac's portrayal strives for an unsettling, primordial gravitas, using a measured, multi-layered vocal delivery to suggest a consciousness vastly older and wearier than humanity itself. His apocalypse operates from a place of profound disappointment, viewing his genocide as a necessary sanitation of a failed experiment. The character's perceived weakness stems not from Isaac's committed performance, but from a narrative that grants him immense scale while denying him the nuanced motivations or personal connections that made villains like Magneto so compelling. The pervasive theme of idolatry and misplaced faith weaves through multiple character trajectories, examining what happens when belief is shattered. For Storm, it is the collapse of literal deification. For Magneto, Apocalypse becomes a new dark messiah after the death of his personal peace. For the students, Xavier's captured presence forces them to test his teachings in the fire of combat without their teacher, questioning whether idealism can survive practical application against a merciless enemy. The physical demolition and subsequent reconstruction of the Xavier School serves as the film's central, potent metaphor for its franchise function. The obliteration of the original mansion, a location laden with emotional history from previous films, represents a clean, if violent, break from the past. The new, sleek structure that rises from its rubble is a visual promise of a modernized future, housing the next generation and symbolizing the dream's enduring, adaptable nature, capable of being rebuilt stronger after each catastrophe. Moira MacTaggart's reintegration into the narrative provides an essential anchor to the human world and a living reminder of Charles Xavier's sacrificed personal life. As a CIA agent, she frames the mutant crisis through the lens of geopolitics and security, illustrating how governments perceive these events as existential threats beyond understanding. Her unresolved romantic tension with Charles adds a layer of poignant melancholy to his character, highlighting the personal costs of his ceaseless dedication to a broader cause. Nightcrawler's spiritual odyssey from pious outcast to confident X-Man is a nuanced exploration of faith seeking a tangible congregation. His early scene, praying outside a church that fears his appearance, encapsulates his tragic separation from the grace he seeks. The Xavier School offers him a secular form of communion based on unconditional acceptance and shared purpose, allowing him to translate his devotion into loyalty to a family that sees his true self, not his demonic visage. The film's narrative architecture struggles under the weight of its ambitions, attempting to harmonize intimate character etudes with a symphony of global devastation. This often results in a fragmented rhythm where profound moments, like Magneto's grief, are juxtaposed with hurried sequences like the Horseman's recruitment. The final battle, while expansive, risks succumbing to a monotonous rhythm of CGI-driven destruction that can dilute the personal stakes established in the film's stronger, quieter scenes. Critical analysis frequently pinpointed this tonal and structural unevenness, observing that the sophisticated character-driven drama that elevated the prior films was at times overwhelmed by generic spectacle. The profound philosophical duel between Xavier's hope and Apocalypse's social Darwinism often becomes obscured in the literal rubble, reducing their conflict to a contest of sheer might rather than a compelling battle of irreconcilable ideologies for the soul of mutant kind. The technical ambition to stage a mutant-powered apocalypse pushed the visual effects to unprecedented levels within the series, demanding the creation of worldwide cataclysms rooted in specific powers. While sequences like the magnetic manipulation of the planet's core or the granular disintegration of cities were monumental technical achievements, their integration was not seamless. Some effects were criticized for a weightless, artificial quality that lessened the visceral impact compared to the more practical, character-centric action of the franchise's past. The enigmatic post-credits scene featuring the Essex Corporation remains a monument to lost potential, a promise of a cerebral and sinister future antagonist that was never realized. Mr. Sinister, with his fascination with mutant genetics and manipulative elegance, represented an ideal intellectual counterpoint to the newly formed, morally grounded X-Men. This tease ultimately highlighted a road not taken, leaning into the franchise's potential for complex villainy, making its abandonment a point of lasting frustration for the lore-focused audience. Within the sprawling tapestry of the X-Men film series, this installment occupies the necessary but ungainly role of a transitional catalyst. It successfully achieved its primary mission of rebooting the core team and aesthetic to a classic, recognizable status, but the narrative mechanics of that reset were often clumsy and overstuffed. Its legacy is thus one of functional success overshadowed by artistic compromise, a bridge between two distinct eras of the franchise that is traversed with more spectacle than grace. The overarching meditation on legacy binds the film's disparate elements together, as every major character wrestles with the world they will bequeath. Apocalypse seeks a legacy of purified dominance, Magneto one of vengeful ruin, Xavier one of resilient hope, and Mystique one of pragmatic leadership. The young mutants embody the living reception of these legacies, inheriting a fractured world and consciously choosing to build upon the foundation of Xavier's dream, thus becoming the architects of the next chapter. Xavier's final visual codification as the iconic, bald figure in the wheelchair, overseeing the Danger Room session, is a moment of profound narrative and meta-narrative closure. It signifies the completion of his evolution from the optimistic young man of first class into the timeless sage, and signals the timeline's alignment with a more traditional X-Men mythology. This image is a direct invitation to the audience, a promise that the foundational adventures of this beloved team are now beginning in earnest within this revised universe. The ethical dialectic between power and moral responsibility is tested in the crucible of absolute threat, presenting two diametrically opposed paradigms. Apocalypse champions power as its own moral justification, a right of the strong to reshape existence. The X-Men, through trial, learn that true power is manifested in restraint, protection, and the courageous choice to defend a world that fears and hates them, thereby defining heroism not by the scale of one's ability, but by the integrity with which it is wielded. The 1980s setting operates as more than mere backdrop, infusing the conflict with the era's distinct anxieties about nuclear annihilation, consumerist excess, and the dawn of the information age. Apocalypse's contempt can be read as a primordial rejection of this perceived decadence and complexity. Conversely, the X-Men's embrace of more flamboyant costumes and public heroism aligns with the decade's celebration of individuality and boldness, visually rooting their new beginning in the optimistic pop culture of the time. A deep-seated yearning for belonging and a profound experience of loss serve as the primary motivators for nearly every major character, uniting them in shared human emotion despite their supernatural abilities. Magneto is paralyzed by loss, Storm seeks belonging through power, Jean fears the loss of control, and Nightcrawler yearns for a spiritual home. The Xavier School emerges as the narrative's answer to this universal longing, a sanctuary built not on blood, but on the shared experience of being different, transforming loneliness into collective strength. The tactical choreography of the final battle demonstrates a mature understanding of superhero teamwork, where diverse abilities are synergistically combined rather than simply displayed. Cyclops' sustained optic beams provide covering fire and destroy debris. Nightcrawler's teleportation enables surgical strikes and rescues. Storm's control of the atmosphere disrupts the battlefield, and Quicksilver's speed creates fleeting opportunities. This coordinated effort showcases their evolution into a cohesive unit, proving that collective strategy and trust can overcome a monolithic, singular power. Costume evolution functions as a direct visual language for character development and allegiance throughout the narrative. Mystique's shift from her natural blue form to human disguise, and finally to a utilitarian combat suit, charts her path from hiding to leading. The Horseman's uniform, intimidating armor reflects their surrender of identity to Apocalypse's aesthetic, while the X-Men's final, individualized yet unified suits symbolize their commitment to a common cause without erasing their personal identities. The auditory landscape of the film is carefully crafted to underscore its thematic and emotional divides. Apocalypse's motifs are characterized by deep, choral chants and metallic dissonance, evoking a sense of ancient, impersonal judgment. The themes associated with the X-Men, particularly in the school and finale, are more orchestral and heroic, brimming with melodic hope. The deliberate use of 1980s pop music, such as the Eurythmics during Quicksilver's scene, provides ironic commentary, period flavor, and a rhythmic heartbeat to the action. The concept of family, in all its forms, is the emotional bedrock upon which the entire conflict is built, explored through its presence, destruction, and reformation. Magneto's storyline is a devastating treatise on the annihilation of family and the desperate, often destructive, attempts to rebuild it. The Xavier School stands as a triumphant example of a chosen family, providing unconditional support. Even Apocalypse corrupts this concept, presenting himself as a demanding patriarch to his four horsemen. The film ultimately argues that the resilient, voluntary bonds of a chosen family are more powerful than the forced obedience of tyranny. Cinematographic choices are meticulously employed to reflect internal states and thematic contrasts. The Poland sequences with Magneto are rendered in a bleak, desaturated palette, all cold blues and grays, mirroring his emotional numbness and the harsh finality of his loss. In stark contrast, the Xavier School is bathed in warm, golden light, with wide shots emphasizing open, inviting spaces that visually communicate safety, community, and intellectual freedom. Apocalypse's scenes are dominated by stark shadows, deep hues, and chaotic, sweeping crane shots that embody his cold, disordered, and grandiose vision of the world. The film's editorial rhythm undergoes a deliberate transformation, accelerating in pace to mirror the escalating global crisis. The leisurely, character-focused pacing of the first act, which allows for introductions and emotional grounding, gives way to rapid, jarring cross-cutting in the third act between disparate global disaster zones and personal struggles. This technique effectively conveys the overwhelming, simultaneous nature of Apocalypse's assault, immersing the viewer in the chaos and creating a visceral sense of urgency for the scattered heroes to unite. Dialogue often serves as a vehicle for the film's central philosophical conflict, with key lines crystallizing the opposing worldviews at stake. Apocalypse's declarations, like, "I am the rocks of the eternal shore," speak to his perceived permanence and divine right. Xavier's plea to Eric, "You still have a choice," cuts to the heart of the film's theme of redemption and free will. The younger characters' exchanges are less about ideology and more about practical trust and fear, anchoring the cosmic stakes in relatable, interpersonal dynamics. The portrayal of its female characters presents a spectrum of agency and development, offering complexity to some while relegating others to archetype. Mystique is thrust into a position of leadership, grappling with its burdens. Jean Grey's arc is central to the narrative's climax, positioning her as the decisive force. Storm is granted a clear, self-determined journey from follower to independent actor. Psylocke, however, remains largely an aesthetic object, a deadly silhouette whose rich potential from the source material is lamentably untapped in favor of silent menace. The political subtext, though less nuanced than in earlier franchise entries, remains a persistent undercurrent, exploring the consequences of fear and institutional power. The human authorities' reaction to mutant activity is one of panicked, disproportionate force, directly causing the tragedy that creates Apocalypse's greatest weapon. Apocalypse's proposed solution is the ultimate extremist response to prejudice. Not integration, revolution, or segregation, but the complete eradication and replacement of the ruling species, presenting a terrifyingly simplistic answer to a complex social problem. The film engages with the concept of mutation as evolution by presenting two extreme interpretations. Apocalypse views himself as evolution personified, a deliberate, superior step that must forcibly clear away the inferior past. Xavier champions a view of mutation as a natural, diverse, and ongoing process to be integrated thoughtfully into the world. Their conflict, therefore, becomes a battle over the direction of life itself, one of violent, intelligent design versus one of cooperative, emergent complexity. The strategic use of humor, channeled primarily through Quicksilver and the youthful banter of the new recruits, provides essential levity while performing crucial character work. It serves to humanize these powerful individuals, reminding the audience of their age, insecurities, and camaraderie amidst the looming apocalypse. This balance prevents the narrative from collapsing under its own portentous weight and maintains the audience's emotional investment in the protagonists as people, not just as powerful archetypes. The legacy of the preceding films is honored not merely through returning faces, but through visual echoes and the continued evolution of long-standing relationships. The Weapon X facility is a direct visual callback to X2. The fractured, yet enduring bond between Charles, Eric, and Raven remains the emotional core, carrying the weight of histories depicted in First Class and Days of Future Past. This continuity rewards long-term viewers with a sense of deep history, even as the plot ventures into more overtly mythological and global territory. The ultimate defeat of Apocalypse is meticulously framed as a chorus of different strengths harmonizing, rather than a solo performance of overwhelming power. Jean's raw phoenix energy, Charles's unbreakable mental fortitude, Eric's masterful elemental control, the young team's brave coordination, and Mystique's relentless perseverance are all indispensable components. This collective victory reinforces the foundational X-Men ethos that diversity and unity are themselves a form of power, and that protecting a fragile world is the highest expression of a heroism defined by conscience, not conquest. The concluding image offers a definitive and hopeful closure to this chapter, while explicitly setting the stage for the future. The sight of the new X-Men, united in uniform, training in the Danger Room under Professor X's guidance, is a direct visual promise of the classic, mission-based stories to come. It represents a hard-won stability, a dream not just preserved but actively advanced, ready to welcome the next generation and face whatever threats emerge, embodying the perpetual and adaptable nature of Xavier's enduring ideal. The moral architecture of the narrative rests upon the precarious balance between Xavier's telepathic idealism and the brutal physical reality of a world that often rejects it. This philosophical framework is stress-tested to its absolute limit by an antagonist who views compassion as an evolutionary dead end and empathy as a neurological flaw to be corrected. The psychic violation Xavier endures becomes a harrowing metaphor for the vulnerability of open minds in a conflict against absolute, closed certainty, yet his unwavering sense of self within that mental prison proves to be the critical flaw in Apocalypse's otherwise meticulous plan of global subjugation. Magneto's descent is rendered with a tragic specificity that elevates it beyond mere villainous turn into a profound character study of grief weaponized. His peaceful life in Poland was a secret masterpiece of normalcy, a deliberate and fragile construction built piece by piece over a decade, each moment a quiet defiance of his own tragic history. Its obliteration does not simply trigger rage but offers a horrific, final proof that his deepest cynicism was correct all along, transforming him from a man seeking a place in the world into an instrument of its utter negation, making his power under Apocalypse an expression of pure, world-shattering sorrow. Apocalypse functions as a force of narrative entropy, a being whose very existence seeks to simplify the complex tapestry of human and mutant society into a stark hierarchy of strength. His critique is peculiarly pointed at the concept of hiding one's power, viewing the X-Men not as heroes but as collaborators in their own diminishment, teaching gifted children to fear their own magnificence. The chilling brilliance of targeting Xavier's body is its symbolic precision, aiming to hollow out the foremost advocate for mutant-human harmony and repurpose that vessel as a broadcast tower for a doctrine of ruthless, unforgiving dominance. Mystique's contested role as a public symbol and battlefield commander creates an ongoing friction that the narrative intermittently explores with genuine insight. Her leadership is instinctual and tactical, born of decades of covert survival and understanding the mechanics of prejudice, offering the young X-Men a curriculum in practical defense that Xavier's more theoretical teachings lack. This positions her as the essential bridge between the school's insulated ideals and the harsh, often ugly realities of a world that may never accept them. A mentor in the art of war when peace is no longer an option. The adolescent anxieties of the young X-Men are intricately tied to their emerging abilities, crafting a compelling parallel between mutant puberty and the universal struggle for self-control and identity. Jean's fear of the Phoenix is a terror of the infinite capacity within her own mind, a cosmic claustrophobia where her thoughts could unravel reality itself. Cyclops' reliance on the visor is a tangible representation of his fear of causing inadvertent harm, a need for external technological control over an innate, destructive force. Nightcrawler's desire for sanctuary underscores the profound loneliness of being visibly different in a world that prays to a god whose houses would deny him entry. Storm's theological disillusionment forms a complete and resonant arc that deftly reframes her comic book origins within this cinematic mythology. Her initial devotion to Apocalypse is a logical extension of her circumstances. An orphan seeking order and potency in a chaotic world, finding it in a figure of seemingly divine power. Her pivotal crisis of faith occurs when she witnesses the indiscriminate nature of his destruction. Realizing a true deity would cherish its creations, not expend them as mere fuel for its ambition, forcing her to redefine divinity as stewardship rather than supremacy. The process of enhancement that Apocalypse performs on his horsemen is a vivid dramatization of corrupted mentorship, exchanging potential for obedience. Psylocke's transformation into a living weapon and Archangel's metamorphosis into a vessel of projectile fury strip them of narrative voice, rendering them embodiments of a singular will. This stands in direct opposition to the developmental journey of the X-Men, whose training under Xavier and Mystique is designed to integrate power with personal ethics, fostering individuality within a collective purpose, not erasing it for a monolithic cause. Quicksilver's high-velocity rescue operation transcends its function as spectacle to become a poignant inventory of the Xavier School's soul. Each save is personalized, a game of chess preserved, a fish tank stabilized, cataloging the quiet, mundane moments that constitute a life and a community. The sequence's infectious joy and deliberate slowness within speed acts as the film's beating heart, defiantly asserting what is worth saving not from grand ideological threats, but from the simple, physics-based catastrophe of collapsing concrete and steel. The unflinching brutality of the Weapon X breakout scene serves as a crucial tonal counterweight and a vital piece of historical retconning within the revised chronology. It etches the origin of Wolverine's adamantium skeleton into this new timeline with raw, clinical horror, grounding a legendary comic book element in visceral suffering. Jean's empathetic intrusion into this storm of rage is a moment of profound connection, establishing a psychic bond that transcends time and trauma and demonstrating that the most potent response to engineered violence is unasked for compassion. The choice of Cairo as the final battleground is rich with symbolic weight, representing a collision of origins, both for Apocalypse's ancient reign and for the dawn of human civilization itself. The systematic disassembly of the city's ancient and modern layers by Apocalypse's power literalizes his desire to unmake history and build anew from a blank slate. The X-Men's desperate defense, focused on evacuating civilians and minimizing harm, embodies a commitment to preserving the flawed, ongoing project of human history and working to improve it from within. Jean's climactic unleashing of the Phoenix is framed as a terrifyingly beautiful act of self-sacrifice, a surrender to a power she has spent a lifetime suppressing. The visual spectacle of the Phoenix Force is not that of a controlled energy beam, but of a chaotic, cosmic wildfire, emphasizing its nature as a fundamental force of creation and destruction that merely uses Jean as its conduit. This moment of victory is deeply ambivalent, a triumph that fundamentally alters her and sets a timer on her stability, weaving tragic inevitability into the fabric of the rebooted timeline. Magneto's redemption is a grueling journey back from the abyss, requiring not rhetoric but visceral, sacrificial proof that his despair is not the only truth. Mystique's near-fatal interception serves as a shocking mirror, reflecting his own capacity for loyalty and love that he believed was incinerated. His silent, laborious work in reconstructing the mansion is his first act of true creation in the film, using the power that globally scarred the planet to locally rebuild the world's primary symbol of mutant sanctuary and hope. The aesthetic evolution in the film's design, from the tailored, period-specific looks of the earlier trilogy to a more bold, unapologetically comic book-inspired visual language, marks a deliberate franchise pivot. The new team's finalized uniforms, with their distinct colors, harnesses, and individual accents, serve as a visual manifesto. They are now a public-facing team, their unity expressed through coordinated design rather than concealed behind civilian clothes. This is a metatextual statement of intent, embracing the colorful, heroic iconography that is the hallmark of the source material. Oscar Isaac's performance is an exercise in conveying immense, weary power through vocal modulation and physical stillness, suggesting a consciousness for whom millennia are but chapters. His Apocalypse is motivated by a profound sense of historical disappointment, viewing his genocide as a merciful reset for a corrupted experiment. The character's narrative thinness stems not from Isaac's commitment, but from a script that grants him godlike stature, while denying him the relatable motivations or personal connections that fuel compelling drama, leaving him as a formidable plot device more than a nuanced character. The film's exploration of faith and idolatry interrogates what happens when deeply held beliefs are confronted with incontrovertible, often brutal, evidence. For Storm, it is the shattering of literal deification. For Magneto, Apocalypse becomes a dark messiah validating his worst impulses after the death of his personal religion of peace. For the students, Xavier's absence forces them to practice his teachings in the field without their teacher's guidance, testing whether philosophical idealism can withstand the corrosive pressure of a fight for literal survival against a merciless god. The physical destruction and subsequent reconstruction of the Xavier Mansion operates as the film's central, unifying metaphor for its role in the franchise. The violent leveling of the original estate, a location saturated with memories from previous films, represents a decisive, cathartic break from the past. The modern geometric structure that rises in its place is a promise of a forward-looking future, symbolizing the dream's capacity not just to endure, but to evolve, to be architecturally reborn to house and train the next generation of mutants. Moira MacTaggart's return provides a necessary tether to the human world's perspective and a living reminder of the personal life Charles Xavier has consistently relinquished. Her role as a CIA agent frames the mutant phenomenon through the lens of state security and geopolitical panic, illustrating how institutions process the incomprehensible through protocols of fear and control. The unresolved romantic history between her and Charles adds a layer of poignant, personal cost to his mission. A road not taken that haunts his otherwise resolute dedication. Nightcrawler's spiritual journey from pious outcast to assured X-Man is a nuanced treatise on finding grace in community rather than doctrine. His initial exclusion from the physical church, despite his deep faith, highlights the hypocrisy of institutions that preach love but practice fear. The Xavier School offers him a different congregation, one based on mutual acceptance and shared purpose, allowing him to translate his devotional spirit into loyalty for a family that sees his soul, not his startling appearance. The film's structural challenge lies in its attempt to be an intimate ensemble drama and a global disaster epic simultaneously, often resulting in a jarring narrative rhythm. Profoundly quiet, character-driven moments, such as Magneto's forest grief, are abruptly followed by hectic, plot-forwarding sequences like the rapid recruitment of the Horsemen. The final confrontation, while grand in scale, can devolve into a repetitive exchange of energy blasts and collapsing structures, threatening to overwhelm the personal stakes established in the film's more grounded sequences. Critical reception frequently centered on this tonal and structural unevenness, noting that the sophisticated political and personal allegories that define the franchise's peak were often submerged under conventional CGI spectacle. The compelling ideological duel between Xavier's inclusive hope and Apocalypse's exclusive social Darwinism becomes obscured in the third-act rubble, simplifying their conflict into a familiar battle of sheer power, thereby losing the nuanced philosophical tension that is the X-Men's narrative birthright. The technical ambition to visualize a mutant apocalypse demanded innovative effects work to portray the systemic unraveling of global order through specific powers. While sequences like the planet-wide magnetic upheaval or the molecular disintegration of cities were significant technical achievements, their integration was not always seamless. Some digital effects lacked the tangible, physical weight of the franchise's more practical stunts, occasionally making the cataclysm feel visually abstract rather than viscerally threatening. The post-credits scene featuring the Essex Corporation remains a monument to unexplored narrative potential, a tantalizing hint at a more cerebral and scientifically sinister villainy that never materialized. Mr. Sinister, with his obsession with genetic perfection and manipulative, theatrical evil, represented an ideal intellectual antagonist for the newly formed, morally principled X-Men team. This tease ultimately serves as a frustrating glimpse of an alternate, more psychologically complex direction the franchise could have taken after its foundational reboot. Within the broader X-Men film saga, this installment occupies the crucial, albeit awkward, position of a narrative reset button. It successfully achieved its primary goal of reintroducing the classic team in a modern context, but the process of that reintroduction was narratively congested and thematically scattered. Its legacy is thus one of functional necessity over artistic finesse, a bridge between cinematic eras that is structurally sound but lacking in the elegance and focused storytelling of the spans it connects. The overarching meditation on legacy binds the film's disparate plot lines, as every principal character grapples with the future they are sculpting through present action. Apocalypse seeks a legacy of stark, unforgetting hierarchy. Magneto flirts with a legacy of vengeful ruin. Xavier fights for a legacy of resilient coexistence. The young mutants physically embody the reception of these contested legacies, inheriting a fractured world and consciously choosing to build upon the foundation of Xavier's dream, thus becoming the active authors of the next chapter in mutant history. Xavier's final visual transformation into the iconic, bald figure in the Cerebro helmet is a moment of profound narrative and symbolic convergence. It signifies the completion of his journey from the optimistic academic of first class into the timeless sage leader, and marks the timeline's definitive alignment with core X-Men iconography. This image is a direct promise to the audience. The foundational dynamics and adventures of this beloved team are now properly inaugurated within this revised cinematic universe. The ethical dichotomy between power and responsibility is tested in extremis, presenting two incompatible philosophies of might. Apocalypse champions a worldview where power is morality, and the strong possess an inherent right to dominate and reshape existence according to their will. The X-Men, through concerted struggle, arrive at a more complex understanding. That true power is demonstrated through restraint, protection, and the courageous choice to defend a fragile world, thereby defining heroism not by capacity for destruction, but by the wisdom and empathy guiding its application. The 1980s setting infuses the narrative with a distinct cultural and technological texture that contextualizes the conflict. Apocalypse's primordial disdain can be interpreted as a rejection of the era's burgeoning materialism, electronic mediation, and geopolitical stalemate. Conversely, the X-Men's embrace of more flamboyant, individualized uniforms and public heroism aligns with the decade's celebration of personal expression, bold aesthetics, and the rise of the superhero as a pop culture pillar, visually rooting their new beginning in an era of audacious confidence. A profound sense of loss and a desperate search for belonging serve as the primary, unifying motivations across the character spectrum, humanizing the supernatural conflict. Magneto is paralyzed by catastrophic loss. Storm seeks belonging through power and later, principled rebellion. Jean fears the loss of control over her own mind. Nightcrawler yearns for spiritual and social sanctuary. The Xavier School emerges as the narrative's definitive answer to this universal longing, a sanctuary built on the radical premise that difference is not a curse to be hidden, but a gift to be shared within a chosen family. The tactical symphony of the final battle demonstrates a mature understanding of superpowered teamwork as a force multiplier. Cyclops' pinpoint optic blasts provide covering fire and carve strategic pathways. Nightcrawler's teleportation enables surgical strikes, extractions, and disruptive hit-and-run tactics. Storm's atmospheric control alters the very environment of the battlefield. This coordinated interplay showcases their evolution from frightened students into a cohesive tactical unit, proving that strategic synergy and mutual trust can dismantle even a seemingly omnipotent, singular threat. Costume design functions as a precise visual language for tracking character allegiance and evolution throughout the narrative. Mystique's shift from her natural blue form to human disguise, and finally to a pragmatic dark combat suit, charts her path from hiding to leading on her own terms. The Horseman's uniform, sleek armor reflects their surrender of identity to Apocalypse's singular aesthetic vision, while the X-Men's final, individualized yet complementary uniforms symbolize their commitment to a united cause without the erasure of self. The film's auditory landscape is meticulously crafted to underscore its thematic and emotional divides. Apocalypse's sonic signature is one of deep, choral chants, metallic resonance, and atonal dread, evoking a sense of ancient, impersonal judgment. The musical themes for the X-Men, particularly in scenes of unity and resolve, are orchestral, melodic, and imbued with heroic optimism. The deliberate deployment of 1980s pop music, like the Eurythmics during Quicksilver's rescue, provides ironic counterpoint, period authenticity, and a humanizing rhythmic pulse to the superhuman action. The concept of family, in its myriad forms, constitutes the emotional bedrock of the entire narrative, explored through its construction, annihilation, and reformation. Magneto's arc is a devastating study in the annihilation of family and the subsequent, often catastrophic, attempts to rebuild a sense of belonging. The Xavier School stands as a triumphant testament to the chosen family, providing unconditional support and identity. Apocalypse grotesquely parodies this concept, positioning himself as a tyrannical patriarch demanding absolute fealty. The film ultimately argues that the resilient, voluntary bonds of a chosen family are fundamentally more powerful than the coercive obedience demanded by a despot. Cinematographic choices are employed with strategic intent to reflect internal states and thematic contrasts. The sequences in Poland with Magneto are rendered in a bleak, desaturated palette of cold blues and grays, visually mirroring his emotional numbness and the stark finality of his loss. In direct contrast, the Xavier School is bathed in warm, golden light, with wide, stable shots emphasizing open, inviting spaces that communicate safety, intellectual freedom, and community. Apocalypse's scenes are dominated by stark shadows, deep, unnatural hues, and chaotic, sweeping camera movements that embody his cold, disordered, and grandiosely destructive vision for the world. The film's editorial rhythm undergoes a deliberate metamorphosis, accelerating in pace to mirror the escalating, global nature of the crisis. The leisurely, character-focused pacing of the first act, allowing for introductions and emotional grounding, gives way to rapid, disorienting cross-cutting in the third act between disparate global disaster zones and personal struggles. This technique effectively conveys the overwhelming, simultaneous nature of Apocalypse's assault, creating a visceral sense of urgency and chaotic scale that demands a unified response from the scattered heroes. Dialogue often crystallizes the central philosophical conflict, with key lines serving as manifestos for the opposing worldviews. Apocalypse's pronouncements, like, "I am as far beyond mutants as they are beyond you," articulate his self-perception as an evolutionary singularity. Xavier's appeals to Eric, "You're not alone," speak directly to the film's core theme of connection versus isolation. The younger characters' exchanges are less ideological and more focused on practical trust, fear, and coordination, effectively anchoring the cosmic stakes in relatable, interpersonal dynamics. The portrayal of its female characters presents a spectrum of agency, offering narrative centrality to some while relegating others to functional archetypes. Mystique is thrust into a burdensome leadership role, grappling with its implications. Jean Grey's arc is pivotal to the narrative's climax, positioning her as the linchpin of victory. Storm is granted a clear, self-determined journey from acolyte to independent hero. Psylocke, however, remains largely an aesthetic object, a visually striking but narratively silent instrument whose rich potential from the comics is lamentably reduced to poised menace. The political subtext, though less nuanced than in the franchise's best entries, persists as a foundational layer, examining the consequences of institutional fear. The human authorities' reaction to unexplained mutant activity is one of panicked, overwhelming force, a response that directly manufactures the very threat it seeks to preempt. Apocalypse's genocidal solution represents the ultimate, horrifying endpoint of extremist ideology. Not reform, not revolution, but the complete eradication and replacement of the perceived inferior species, offering a terrifyingly simplistic final solution to the complex problem of coexistence. The film engages with the concept of mutation as evolution by presenting it as a contested narrative. Apocalypse posits himself as evolution's conscious architect and executioner, a superior form that must forcibly clear the genetic landscape. Xavier champions a view of mutation as a natural, diverse, and ongoing process to be integrated thoughtfully into the biosphere. Their conflict, therefore, becomes a battle over the story of life itself, one of intelligent, violent design versus one of emergent, cooperative complexity. The strategic deployment of humor, channeled primarily through Quicksilver and the youthful interactions of the new recruits, provides essential tonal modulation and character depth. It serves to humanize these powerful individuals, reminding the audience of their age, insecurities, and the camaraderie that persists even in the face of apocalyptic threat. This balance prevents the narrative from becoming oppressively self-serious and maintains the audience's emotional investment in the protagonists as relatable people, not merely as archetypal heroes or powerful plot functions. The legacy of the preceding films is honored not merely through returning characters, but through visual and emotional echoes that reward long-term viewers. The Weapon X facility is a direct visual callback to the franchise's past. The fractured, yet enduring bond between Charles, Eric, and Raven remains the emotional core, carrying the profound weight of histories depicted in the earlier chapters. This continuity provides a rich sense of lived-in history and consequence, even as the plot propels the universe into a new, more overtly mythological and spectacular phase. The ultimate defeat of Apocalypse is meticulously framed as a chorus of complementary strengths harmonizing in concert, rather than a solo performance of overwhelming power. Jean's raw, cosmic force, Charles's unbreakable mental resilience, Eric's masterful elemental control, the young team's brave and coordinated tactics, and Mystique's relentless perseverance are all indispensable components of the victory. This collective triumph reinforces the foundational X-Men ethos that diversity and unity are themselves a potent form of power, and that protecting a fragile, flawed world is the highest expression of a heroism defined by conscience and sacrifice, not conquest. The concluding tableau offers a definitive and hopeful closure to this chapter, while explicitly setting the stage for the franchise's future. The sight of the new X-Men, united in uniform, training in the Danger Room under Professor X's guidance, is a direct visual promise of the classic, mission-based stories to come. It represents a hard-won stability, a dream not merely preserved but actively advanced and institutionalized, standing ready to welcome the next generation and face whatever threats emerge, thereby embodying the perpetual, evolving, and ultimately optimistic nature of Xavier's enduring ideal. Professor Xavier's foundational belief system faces its most severe trial not through debate, but through a violent, physical incursion into the sanctum of his own consciousness. This psychic captivity represents the ultimate perversion of his life's work, transforming the mind he views as a sacred space for dialogue into a prison and a weapon. His ability to maintain his identity within this mental onslaught becomes the crucial linchpin for the entire resistance, proving that his philosophy is not one of weakness, but of immense, often solitary, fortitude in the face of absolute corruption. Magneto's tragic trajectory is mapped with heartbreaking precision, charting the systematic dismantling of a carefully constructed piece that stood as a quiet monument to his deepest, most secret hopes. The life he built in Poland was a daily act of defiance against his own nature and history, a performance of normalcy that became genuinely transformative until it was erased. This loss functions not as a trigger for anger, but as an irrefutable, devastating affirmation of his worldview, converting his immeasurable power from a potential tool for protection into a focused instrument of global grief, making his alliance with Apocalypse a logical, if horrifying, conclusion to his personal narrative. Apocalypse operates as a narrative force of anti-evolution, a being whose grand design seeks to regress the complex ecosystem of human and mutant society into a stark, brutal monoculture of strength. His disdain is particularly reserved for systems of governance, education, and faith that he sees as tools to suppress natural hierarchy. The specific targeting of Charles Xavier for bodily appropriation is a masterstroke of symbolic violence, aiming to obliterate the foremost architect of cooperative coexistence from the inside out, using his global telepathic reach not to unite, but to dominate and homogenize every thinking mind on the planet. Mystique's uncomfortable ascension to a figure of public inspiration and tactical command generates a persistent and fruitful tension between her instincts and her responsibilities. Her methodology is inherently pragmatic, shaped by decades of espionage and understanding prejudice from the inside, offering the nascent X-Men a crucial education in real-world threat assessment and defensive strategy. This makes her the indispensable conduit between Xavier's aspirational academy and the dangerous realities of a world that remains deeply afraid, teaching that survival sometimes requires a fight, and that a fight requires smart, unified tactics. The internal struggles of the young X-Men are masterfully tied to the external manifestation of their powers, creating powerful allegories for the turmoil of growing into one's self. Jean's fear of the Phoenix is akin to the terror of a boundless imagination that could accidentally rewrite reality, a burden of cosmic consciousness. Cyclops' dependence on his visor is a physical manifestation of his anxiety over unintended consequences, a technological crutch for a biological gift that feels more like a curse. Nightcrawler's quest for a spiritual home highlights the profound alienation experienced when one's very appearance is deemed incompatible with the places designed for solace and community. Storm's intellectual and ethical journey from blind faith to reasoned rebellion provides a compelling blueprint for ideological maturation. Her initial devotion to Apocalypse is a rational choice for a brilliant mind left with no other framework for understanding her own power, finding in him a narrative of divine right that explains her difference. Her turning point is an intellectual as much as a moral one, recognizing the logical flaw in a deity whose grand plan requires the random sacrifice of the innocent he claims to uplift, forcing her to draft a new personal doctrine where power is wedded to responsibility and protection. The transformative gift Apocalypse bestows upon his horsemen is a grotesque parody of mentorship, trading their autonomy and moral complexity for a simplified, amplified purpose. Psylocke's reduction to a silent, lethal artist and Archangel's metamorphosis into a vessel of purified rage effectively erase their personal histories, turning them into avatars of a singular, tyrannical will. This stands in direct opposition to the developmental path of the young X-Men, whose training emphasizes integration of power with personal ethics, fostering a sense of self that is enhanced by, not sacrificed to, the collective good. Quicksilver's superspeed rescue transcends its breathtaking visual comedy to become a moving testament to the value of mundane, everyday life within the Xavier Institute. Each action, saving a goldfish, stabilizing a beaker, moving a teacher mid-sip, is a tiny, deliberate celebration of the ordinary moments that constitute a community. The sequence's playful tone, existing within a slower temporal dimension, serves as the emotional core of the film, defiantly asserting that the worth of a world lies not in its grand monuments, but in these countless, fragile, personal instants. The unvarnished horror of the Weapon X sequence provides essential grounding and serves as a critical act of historical inscription within the new timeline. It etches the brutal origin of Wolverine's adamantium onto this revised canvas with clinical, visceral detail, connecting a legendary comic book element to raw, screaming agony. Jean's compassionate psychic interruption of this programmed violence is a moment of profound narrative resonance, establishing a soul-deep connection that will echo through time and demonstrating that unrequested understanding can be a radical, pacifying force against even the most conditioned brutality. The selection of Cairo as the apocalyptic battleground is laden with geopolitical and historical symbolism, positioning the conflict at the crossroads of ancient empires and modern nation-states. The methodical dismantling of the city's layered history, from pyramids to modern apartments, by Apocalypse's powers literalizes his desire to erase the cumulative narrative of human civilization. The X-Men's desperate, ground-level efforts to save civilians embody a commitment to the messy, ongoing human story, choosing to be stewards of an imperfect present rather than architects of a pure future built upon a mountain of ashes. Jean's final, cataclysmic release of the Phoenix is portrayed as a terrifyingly transcendent act of self-annihilation and rebirth, a voluntary dissolution of her fear to allow a greater force to act through her. The visual language of the Phoenix is not that of a controlled power, but of a natural cosmic disaster, a solar flare or a supernova, emphasizing its fundamental, impersonal majesty. This victory is thus profoundly bittersweet, a salvation that irrevocably marks her as both the ultimate weapon and the ultimate liability, weaving a strand of tragic destiny directly into the DNA of the rebooted team. Magneto's path to redemption is an arduous climb from a psychological abyss, requiring a visceral, undeniable refutation of his despair rather than persuasive argument. Mystique's sacrificial interception serves as a shocking mirror, reflecting back to him a version of himself capable of loyalty and love that his grief had convinced him was dead. His subsequent, wordless labor in reconstructing the mansion is his first creative act in the film, using the power that scarred the globe to locally, painstakingly rebuild the world's primary symbol of sanctuary, an act of atonement expressed in steel and stone. The film's deliberate aesthetic pivot from the muted period piece realism of the earlier trilogy to a bold, operatic, and comic book-informed visual style marks a conscious franchise recalibration. The new team's finalized uniforms, with their distinct colors, functional harnesses, and individualized details, serve as a visual declaration of their transition into a public-facing superhero team. This shift is a metatextual embrace of the source material's inherent iconography, signaling a confidence in portraying superheroism as something vibrant, identifiable, and proudly on display. Oscar Isaac's performance is a study in conveying immeasurable age and disdain through calibrated stillness, and a voice that seems to emanate from the depths of the earth. His Apocalypse is driven by a profound, millennia-spanning boredom and disappointment, viewing his genocidal campaign as a necessary agricultural clearing of a weed-choked field. The character's narrative limitations stem from a conception that prioritizes scale over specificity, granting him godlike power, but denying him the relatable motivations or personal vulnerabilities that foster deep audience engagement, leaving him a magnificent engine of plot more than a layered character. The film's intricate exploration of belief systems examines the cataclysmic personal impact when deeply held doctrines are confronted with contradictory evidence. For Storm, it is the collapse of a literal divine hierarchy. For Magneto, Apocalypse becomes a dark prophet confirming his creed of perpetual conflict after the murder of his personal testament to peace. For the students, Xavier's physical and psychic absence forces them to become practitioners of his philosophy without his guidance, testing whether ideals of compassion and restraint can hold under the extreme duress of a fight against an uncompromising God. The physical obliteration and phoenix-like reconstruction of the Xavier School stands as the film's most potent metaphor for its franchise purpose. The violent demolition of the original mansion, a location saturated with emotional history, represents a decisive, cathartic break from previous narrative continuity. The sleek, modern complex that rises symbolizes an evolved dream, architecturally reborn to be more secure, more advanced, and better suited to train the next generation, illustrating the concept's capacity for adaptation and renewal in the face of existential threats. Moira MacTaggart's reintroduction serves as a vital connective tissue to the human world's perspective and a living reminder of the personal sacrifices underpinning Charles Xavier's mission. Her professional role as a CIA agent frames the mutant phenomenon through the rigid lens of national security and intelligence failure, demonstrating how institutions default to fear and containment when faced with the unexplainable. The lingering, unspoken history with Charles adds a layer of poignant regret to his character, a shadow life of normalcy and love that remains a road permanently not taken. Nightcrawler's theological and social journey from ostracized believer to confident X-Man is a nuanced exploration of finding salvation in community rather than doctrine. His poignant exclusion from the physical church, despite his devout faith, critiques institutions that preach inclusive love but practice exclusive fear. The Xavier School offers him a new kind of congregation, one based on mutual acceptance and shared purpose, allowing him to redirect his deep spirituality into devotion to a family that judges him by his character and actions, not his startling appearance. The film's structural ambition, attempting to marry an intimate character-driven ensemble piece with a globe-shattering disaster epic, often results in a discordant narrative tempo. Deeply resonant, quiet moments of character reflection are frequently interrupted by hectic, plot-propelling sequences that can feel perfunctory. The final confrontation, while immense in scale, risks devolving into a somewhat repetitive spectacle of energy projection and digital demolition, at times threatening to overshadow the carefully established personal stakes and ideological conflict. Critical analysis consistently highlighted this tonal and structural unevenness, noting that the sophisticated political and personal allegories that define the franchise's most acclaimed entries were often diluted by conventional, CGI-heavy blockbuster spectacle. The core ideological struggle between Xavier's inclusive hope and Apocalypse's exclusive social Darwinism becomes obscured amidst third-act rubble, simplifying a rich philosophical conflict into a familiar, if visually impressive, contest of raw power. The technical undertaking to visualize an extinction-level event orchestrated by a single mutant required pioneering effects work to depict systemic global collapse. While sequences like the planetary magnetic reversal or the atomic disintegration of cities were significant feats of digital artistry, their integration sometimes lacked the tactile, physical weight that characterized the franchise's more grounded action. This occasionally rendered the Apocalypse visually impressive but emotionally distant, a spectacle to observe rather than a visceral catastrophe to feel. The post-credits scene featuring the Essex Corporation remains a poignant testament to unexplored narrative avenues, a tantalizing hint at a more intellectually sophisticated and scientifically grounded form of villainy. Mr. Sinister, with his obsession with genetic supremacy and penchant for elegant manipulation, represented the perfect cerebral antagonist for the newly formed, morally guided X-Men. This tease ultimately serves as a frustrating artifact of a road not taken, pointing toward a potentially more nuanced and psychologically complex future for the franchise that remained unrealized. Within the expansive chronology of the X-Men film series, this chapter occupies the essential, if inelegant, role of a narrative reset mechanism. It successfully executed its primary function of reintroducing the classic team dynamics in a contemporary setting, but the execution of that reintroduction was often narratively congested. Its legacy is thus one of utilitarian necessity, a functional bridge between cinematic eras that prioritizes setting the new status quo over the elegance and focused storytelling of its finest predecessors. The overarching rumination on legacy binds the film's multifarious plot threads, as each central character consciously or unconsciously sculpts the future through present action. Apocalypse seeks to impose a legacy of stark, immutable hierarchy. Magneto flirts with cementing a legacy of vengeful, nihilistic ruin. Xavier fights to preserve and advance a legacy of resilient, hopeful coexistence. The young mutants physically embody the living reception of these contested futures, inheriting a fractured world and actively choosing to build upon the foundation of Xavier's dream, thereby becoming the authors of the next act in mutant history. Xavier's final, iconic visual presentation, bald in a Cerebro helmet, overseeing the Danger Room, is a moment of profound narrative and symbolic convergence. It signifies the culmination of his personal journey into the timeless sage and marks the timeline's definitive alignment with core X-Men mythology. This image is a direct covenant with the audience, a promise that the foundational dynamics, relationships, and mission statement adventures of this beloved team are now properly inaugurated and ready to unfold. The ethical dichotomy between power and moral responsibility is interrogated under the most extreme conditions, presenting two fundamentally incompatible philosophies. Apocalypse champions a worldview where power constitutes its own morality, granting the strong an inherent right to dominate and reshape existence. The X-Men, through collective struggle, arrive at a more nuanced understanding. That authentic power is demonstrated through restraint, protection, and the courageous choice to defend a fragile world, thereby defining heroism not by the capacity for destruction, but by the wisdom and ethical framework guiding its application. The 1980s setting infuses the narrative with a distinct cultural and technological texture that actively contextualizes the central conflict. Apocalypse's primordial disdain can be interpreted as a rejection of the era's burgeoning materialism, electronic mediation, and the abstract, interconnected nature of modern geopolitics. Conversely, the X-Men's adoption of more flamboyant, individualized uniforms and a public-facing identity aligns with the decade's celebration of personal expression, bold aesthetics, and the ascendancy of the superhero as a dominant pop culture icon, visually rooting their new beginning in an era defined by audacious confidence. A profound, universal experience of loss and a desperate search for belonging serve as the primary, unifying motivations across the character spectrum, grounding the supernatural conflict in deeply human emotion. Magneto is paralyzed by catastrophic, personal loss. Storm seeks belonging through structure and later, principled autonomy. Jean fears the loss of control over her own boundless mind. Nightcrawler yearns for spiritual and social sanctuary. The Xavier School emerges as the narrative's definitive answer to this existential longing. A sanctuary built on the radical premise that difference is not a curse to be hidden, but the very basis for a new, chosen form of family. The tactical choreography of the final battle demonstrates an advanced understanding of superpowered teamwork as a synergistic force. Cyclops' precision optic blasts provide covering fire, carve strategic pathways, and dismantle enemy constructs. Nightcrawler's teleportation enables surgical strikes, emergency extractions, and highly disruptive hit-and-run tactics. Storm's atmospheric control allows for battlefield manipulation on a grand scale, altering visibility, creating obstacles, and redirecting environmental hazards. This coordinated interplay showcases their evolution into a cohesive tactical unit, proving that strategic synergy and mutual trust can deconstruct even a seemingly omnipotent, singular threat. Costume design operates as a precise visual language for tracking character allegiance, evolution, and ideological stance throughout the narrative. Mystique's shift from her natural blue form to human disguise, and finally to a pragmatic armored combat suit, charts her path from concealed outsider to visible leader on her own terms. The Horseman's uniform, sleek armor reflects their total surrender of individuality to Apocalypse's monolithic aesthetic vision. The X-Men's final, individualized yet complementary uniforms symbolize their commitment to a united cause without the erasure of self, celebrating diversity within unity. The film's meticulously crafted auditory landscape is designed to underscore its core thematic and emotional divides. Apocalypse's sonic signature is one of deep, ominous choral chants, metallic reverberations, and atonal, unsettling dread, evoking a sense of ancient, impersonal judgment. The musical themes for the X-Men, particularly in moments of unity and resolve, are orchestral, melodic, and imbued with a spirit of heroic optimism. The deliberate deployment of 1980s pop music, like the Eurythmics during Quicksilver's rescue, provides ironic counterpoint, period authenticity, and a humanizing, rhythmic pulse to the superhuman action. The concept of family, in all its manifold forms, constitutes the unshakable emotional bedrock of the entire narrative, explored through its construction, annihilation, and painful reformation. Magneto's arc is a devastating study in the annihilation of family and the subsequent, often catastrophic, attempts to rebuild a sense of belonging. The Xavier School stands as a triumphant testament to the power of the chosen family, providing unconditional support, identity, and purpose. Apocalypse grotesquely parodies this concept, positioning himself as a tyrannical patriarch demanding absolute fealty. The film ultimately posits that the resilient, voluntary bonds of a chosen family are fundamentally more powerful and enduring than the coercive obedience demanded by a despot. Cinematographic choices are employed with strategic intent to mirror internal psychological states and underscore thematic contrasts. The sequences in Poland with Magneto are rendered in a bleak, desaturated palette of cold blues and grays, visually mirroring his emotional numbness and the stark finality of his loss. In direct contrast, the Xavier School is bathed in warm, golden light, with wide, stable shots emphasizing open, inviting spaces that communicate safety, intellectual freedom, and community. Apocalypse's scenes are dominated by stark shadows, deep, unnatural hues, and chaotic, sweeping camera movements that embody his cold, disordered, and grandiosely destructive vision for the world. The film's editorial rhythm undergoes a deliberate and calculated metamorphosis, accelerating in pace to mirror the escalating, global nature of the crisis. The leisurely, character-focused pacing of the first act, allowing for introductions and emotional grounding, gives way to rapid, disorienting cross-cutting in the third act between disparate global disaster zones and isolated personal struggles. This technique effectively conveys the overwhelming, simultaneous nature of Apocalypse's assault, creating a visceral sense of urgency and chaotic scale that demands a unified, immediate response from the geographically and emotionally scattered heroes. Dialogue frequently serves to crystallize the central philosophical conflict, with key lines operating as concise manifestos for the opposing worldviews. Apocalypse's pronouncements, like "I have been called many names over many lifetimes," articulate his self-perception as a timeless, singular force. Xavier's appeals to connection, "We need you, Eric," speak directly to the film's core theme of solidarity versus isolation. The younger characters' exchanges are less explicitly ideological and more focused on practical trust, shared fear, and tactical coordination, effectively anchoring the cosmic stakes in relatable, interpersonal dynamics. The portrayal of its female characters presents a spectrum of agency and narrative function, offering substantive arcs to some while relegating others to visually striking archetypes. Mystique is thrust into a burdensome, public leadership role, grappling with its implications and her own ambivalence. Jean Grey's journey is pivotal to the narrative's climax, positioning her as the linchpin of victory and the vessel for the franchise's most potent mythic force. Storm is granted a clear, self-determined journey from lost acolyte to independent hero. Psylocke, however, remains largely an aesthetic object, a visually striking but narratively silent instrument whose rich potential from the comics is lamentably reduced to poised, wordless menace. The political subtext, though less nuanced than in the franchise's most politically engaged entries, persists as a foundational layer, examining the catastrophic consequences of institutional fear and preemptive violence. The human authorities' reaction to unexplained mutant activity is one of panicked, overwhelming force, a militaristic response that directly manufactures the very apocalyptic threat it seeks to preempt. Apocalypse's genocidal solution represents the ultimate, horrifying endpoint of such extremist us versus them ideology. Not reform, not revolution, but the complete eradication and replacement of the perceived inferior species, offering a terrifyingly simplistic final solution to the complex, enduring problem of coexistence. The film actively engages with the concept of mutation as evolution by presenting it as a fiercely contested narrative with high stakes. Apocalypse posits himself as evolution's conscious, ruthless architect and executioner, a superior form with the divine right to forcibly clear the genetic landscape. Xavier champions a view of mutation as a natural, diverse, and ongoing process to be integrated thoughtfully, ethically, and compassionately into the existing biosphere. Their conflict, therefore, becomes a battle over the very story of life on Earth, one of intelligent, violent design versus one of emergent, cooperative complexity. The strategic deployment of humor, channeled primarily through Quicksilver's irreverence and the youthful banter of the new recruits, provides essential tonal modulation and invests the characters with relatable humanity. It serves to counterbalance the gravitas of the apocalyptic threat, reminding the audience of the protagonist's youth, insecurities, and the enduring camaraderie that persists even in the face of annihilation. This balance prevents the narrative from becoming oppressively self-serious and maintains the audience's emotional investment in the protagonists as relatable people, not merely as archetypal heroes or narrative functions. The legacy of the preceding films is honored not merely through returning characters, but through deliberate visual and emotional echoes that reward the investment of long-term viewers. The Weapon X facility is a direct visual and thematic callback to the franchise's past. The fractured yet enduring bond between Charles, Eric, and Raven remains the emotional core, carrying the profound weight of shared and divergent histories depicted in earlier chapters. This continuity provides a rich sense of lived-in history and consequence, a foundational depth that persists even as the plot propels the universe into a new, more overtly mythological and spectacular phase. The ultimate defeat of Apocalypse is meticulously framed as a chorus of complementary, non-interchangeable strengths harmonizing in strategic concert. Jean's raw, cosmic force, Charles's unbreakable mental resilience, Eric's masterful elemental control, the young team's brave and coordinated tactics, and Mystique's relentless perseverance are all indispensable, interlocking components of the victory. This collective triumph reinforces the foundational X-Men ethos that diversity and unity are themselves a potent, perhaps the most potent form of power, and that protecting a fragile, flawed world is the highest expression of a heroism defined by conscience, sacrifice, and collective action. The concluding tableau offers a definitive, hopeful closure to this tumultuous chapter, while explicitly setting the thematic and visual stage for the franchise's future. The sight of the new X-Men, united in uniform, training in the Danger Room under Professor X's guidance, is a direct visual promise of the classic, mission-based stories to come. It represents a hard-won stability, a dream not merely preserved but actively advanced, institutionalized, and ready for the next generation. This final image embodies the perpetual, evolving, and ultimately optimistic nature of Xavier's enduring ideal: a haven, a school, and a beacon, constantly being rebuilt and reinforced against the storms to come.